Think about the last time you sat down in a restaurant, a waiting room, or a coffee shop and chose a seat with an open wall behind you. You probably did not choose it. You probably chose the booth against the wall, the corner table, the chair with its back pressed against something solid. Most people do this without thinking about it, without being able to explain it. And when asked why, they say something like it feels more comfortable, or they just prefer it that way. But that answer is not adequate. Because what is actually happening when you choose that seat is not a matter of taste or habit. It is the surface expression of one of the oldest and most deeply embedded threat assessment systems in the human nervous system. A system that has been running continuously in every human being alive for the better part of 2 million years. Stop. Not a quirk. Not a preference. A survival architecture built into your neurology before language existed to describe it. Today we are going to look at what actually happens when you sit with a wall behind you, why you feel exposed when you do not have one, what brain regions are involved, what evolutionary pressures built this response, and why understanding it matters far more than most people realize. Because the research on this is not preliminary. It is not anecdotal. It is robust, cross-cultural, and converging from multiple disciplines simultaneously, from environmental psychology to evolutionary biology to clinical neuroscience. And the day you understand what your nervous system is actually doing in every room you enter is the day you stop misreading your own experience. Let's start with the framework researchers use. The behavior of positioning oneself with a solid structure at the back while maintaining an unobstructed view of the surrounding environment is formalized under something called prospect and refuge theory, first articulated by geographer Jay Appleton in 1975. Appleton argued that humans have a deeply rooted behavioral and aesthetic preference for environments offering two simultaneous conditions. Prospect, meaning a wide-open view that allows you to detect potential threats before they reach you, and refuge, meaning a protected position behind you that eliminates the possibility of unmonitored approach. The restaurant wall you choose without thinking is not a comfort preference. It is a refuge point, and the open room you can survey from that seat is your prospect. Appleton believed this was evolutionary. Decades of neuroscience have confirmed he was right. Here is the crucial thing you must grasp. Appleton's framework was theoretical when he published it. The neurological evidence had not yet been mapped. That mapping came later, and what researchers found when they measured the brain states of people seated in positions of low refuge was not subtle. The amygdala, the brain's primary threat detection and fear processing center, shows measurably elevated activation in people seated with their backs to open space. A study published in the journal Evolutionary Psychological Science measured cortisol levels and behavioral responses in participants placed in different restaurant seating configurations, and found that seating position alone produced statistically significant differences in physiological stress markers. Participants seated with unprotected backs had higher cortisol, reported more discomfort, and turned their heads to check behind them far more often than participants seated against a wall. This single finding, that your body chemistry changes based on where you sit in a room, is the key to understanding everything else, because the amygdala does not respond to abstract reasoning. It does not read the environment and conclude that you are in a safe suburban cafe with no predators present. It responds to spatial geometry. It responds to whether the threat detection perimeter around your body is intact. An open back means the perimeter is broken. Something could approach from a direction you cannot monitor, and the amygdala registers this as a genuine and continuous threat condition. Your cortisol rises. Your scanning behavior increases. A low-level alertness you would describe simply as discomfort runs beneath your conscious experience of the meal or the conversation, taxing cognitive resources the entire time you sit there. You are not imagining it. You are measuring a real biological cost. This is the moment where genuine significance crystallizes for your own experience. This is not a response you can override through conscious reasoning. You can know that you are safe, that the open space behind you contains nothing more threatening than other diners, that no predator has existed in this environment for centuries. The amygdala will continue to flag the open back as a vulnerability regardless. The threat assessment pathway that generates this behavior operates below the level of deliberate thought. It evolved in an environment where an unprotected back represented a genuine mortal risk, where hominid ancestors sitting exposed without visibility behind them were measurably more likely to be killed, and where the individuals who consistently chose refugee positions lived longer and reproduced more successfully than those who did not. You are sitting against the wall because the people who did not sit against the wall are not your ancestors. Let that settle for a moment. The preference you act on every day without reflection is the accumulated behavioral inheritance of roughly 2 million years of selection pressure. Every human being who lived long enough to become part of your lineage was running the same spatial calculation you run unconsciously in every room you enter. Where is the wall? Where is the door? Where can I not be approached unseen? These are not anxious thoughts. They are ancient operational protocols, executing automatically in a nervous system that does not distinguish between the Pleistocene savanna and a modern open-plan cafe. The research goes further. Studies working in the tradition of biophilia theory and cross-cultural environmental psychology found that prospect and refugee preferences are not learned through cultural transmission. They are cross-cultural constants. Subjects from radically different cultural and geographic backgrounds show statistically indistinguishable preferences for high prospect, high refuge seating positions when given free choice in unfamiliar environments. Children who have never been taught to prefer walls over open backs show the same spontaneous orientation toward refuge positions that adults demonstrate everywhere on the planet. This is not socialization. This is not architectural convention. The behavior emerges from within the organism, because the neural architecture producing it was shaped by selection pressure long before any human culture existed to transmit it. There is a clinical dimension here that deserves serious attention. In individuals with post-traumatic stress disorder, the prospect and refuge response is dramatically amplified. The hypervigilance that defines PTSD is, in neurological terms, a dysregulation of exactly the threat assessment circuitry that produces wall preference behavior in the general population. People with PTSD frequently report that sitting with their back exposed is not merely uncomfortable but functionally intolerable, triggering acute anxiety responses that interrupt the ability to remain present in the room at all. Veterans, survivors of assault, and others with trauma histories often describe the deliberate selection of high refuge seating as a non-negotiable requirement in any public space. What the general population experiences as a vague preference, the traumatized nervous system experiences as a survival condition. The difference is one of degree and regulation, not of underlying mechanism. The mechanism is identical in every human nervous system on the planet, and understanding that mechanism changes how we should think about both ordinary discomfort and clinical distress. The architecture of built spaces reflects this preference whether designers acknowledge it consciously or not. Booths and banquette seating are among the most consistently preferred configurations in restaurant design, not because they offer superior physical comfort, but because they provide bilateral refuge, walls on 2 or 3 sides, and a clear forward view of the space. The alcove, the nook, the corner table. These configurations became standard features of human-built environments because the humans using those environments were instinctively drawn to them, filling refuge positions first in every space that offered them. Interior designers who work from purely aesthetic principles discover the prospect refugee preference through observation, through noticing which seats fill first. Hitch arrangements generate the strongest positive responses, which configurations feel settled and right even when no occupant can say why. Now consider what happens in contemporary open-plan office environments. These workspaces, which became dominant in corporate design across the late 20th century, are architecturally hostile to prospect refugee requirements in almost every respect. Workers seated at exposed desks in the center of large open rooms, with no wall behind them and approach vectors open from multiple directions, are sitting in a condition the amygdala registers as continuous low-level threat exposure. Research on open-plan environments consistently finds elevated stress markers, reduced sustained concentration, more frequent task interruption, and lower reported well-being compared to enclosed or semi-enclosed workspaces. Some researchers have argued that the productivity losses attributed to these environments are not explained by noise and visual distraction alone, real as those factors are, but by the sustained neurological cost of operating in a space that violates the fundamental spatial security parameters the human nervous system requires to function well. Your inability to settle and concentrate at an exposed central desk is not a personal failing. It is your amygdala processing 2 million years of accumulated threat geometry, and it does not turn off because the calendar reads differently. What should you do with this understanding? In any environment where you have meaningful control over your seating position, choose refuge. Choose the wall. Not because something is wrong, not because you are anxious, but because reducing the ambient load on your threat assessment system frees cognitive and emotional resources for everything else you are doing in that space. The person who chooses the corner seat with their back against the wall and a clear view of the room is not paranoid. They are operating in alignment with the neurological architecture they were given. Their conversations will tend to be more fully engaged, their recall of the exchange sharper, their experience of the environment more settled and present, because the part of their brain assigned to monitor spatial 3 has been given what it needs and can reduce its operational intensity accordingly. Most people spend years sitting in the wrong seats, not knowing why they feel vaguely unsettled, not knowing there is a reason, not knowing the reason is 2 million years old. Have you ever sat in the center of a room and felt a persistent low-level unease you could not name, and then moved to a seat against the wall and felt it dissolve almost immediately? Share that experience in the comments section below. I go through every single response, and this community consistently surfaces encounters that make the science more vivid and more real than any paper I have encountered. And if you want to understand another invisible system running beneath your conscious awareness, one that shapes your behavior in the environments you move through every single day without realizing it, what you need to watch next stands prepared for you.